Welcome to the Enneagram 2.0 podcast. I'm Beatrice Chestnut.
And I'm Uranio Paes.
And today we're in Brazil together talking about the Enneagram growth process. And more specifically, we want to confront some myths around the inner work journey. We often get asked, what do you mean by inner work? And of course, we mean inner work informed by the Enneagram. So today we're going to talk about what to expect when you really sincerely engage in your Enneagram work, and what are some of the things that you may need to understand that may be confusing or that you may have learned that are really myths.
Yeah, because there are lots of delusions and illusions out there about what happens with someone who does inner work. But before we go there, are you enjoying your stay in Brazil so far?
Oh, very much so.
Okay. You've just had feijoada, which is a very heavy kind of Brazilian food.
For lunch.
For lunch, yeah. And sometimes we feel a little bit like sleepy when we have feijoada. Hopefully we won't look too sleepy here for all of you.
Yes.
And we have done a professional workshop here.
Right.
And we are about to start 2 inner work retreats.
Yes, we're going to do our what was formerly called Retreat A, which is we're now calling the Experiential Enneagram, with a group outside of Sao Paulo, Brazil, maybe an hour or so outside. And then after that, a couple of days after that, we're going to do an advanced retreat with some of our longtime students here in Brazil that we're really excited to see again. And we'll do some more even deeper work with the Enneagram.
Yeah, it feels very good for me to be in Brazil, speak in my own language, to see my people, my students.
And I feel like I know a little bit more Portuguese each time we come.
Yeah, you do, actually.
Although
we can't say bad things. We can't say bad things near you anymore.
I might understand
in Portuguese.
Yes, especially if it's about me.
Yeah, no, we never say it. People love you here, Bea. And and I think being in Brazil, it's interesting to talk about this theme because perhaps just a little bit more than in other places, there is a little bit more realism when it comes to what inner work is. People, at least I think that people are not as afraid as in other places here in Brazil to go deep in things that are hard. And that's a paradox for me because this is a sort of a type 7 country. But maybe it's just my sample.
I think, from my experience as an outside observer being here in Brazil, my sense is that it's a combination of a sense of adventure that comes from being a 7 country, like a sense of like, hey, we're up for anything, let's do it. Let's see what happens. Let's open up and see what comes. Plus just a really heartfelt sense of sincerity around inner work, around the people, especially, I feel really good. The people that come to our events, we really find that for some reason they're very sincere and genuine and they really want to do the work. So we always have an amazing time here in Brazil.
Maybe also a little bit of a self-preservation repressed culture.
Yes.
Like people dive deep and they are not resistant at all.
Exactly.
But anyway, here we are to talk about this very, very exciting theme for me because I like confronting myths in general.
And I also think you're a specialist in bringing a lot of commitment and sincere intention to what inner work really is. And when we're using the Enneagram in the way that we use it, we really want to help people understand what they're getting into, what they need to commit to, and what's really going to be effective. Because, of course, we've talked about before, a lot of people who engage in Enneagram work, I think intentionally or not, often unconsciously, end up wanting to do or doing a spiritual bypass of some kind, sort of bypassing the hard work. idealizing what work is, not really understanding what it really takes.
Yeah.
But I also think that people ask us a lot of questions about what does it really mean. So I think
Yeah.
people really do want to know, and there's a genuine curiosity about what does that mean, and what do I really need to commit to, and what do I need to understand about the step-by-step process that inner work is.
Yeah, and I think also that the newer generations, like the millennials, are more interested in going deeper and without as many, blockings to go deep and
There's not
obstacles.
I think younger people have less skepticism, is what I've seen. They have less resistance.
Yeah.
Uh, Although I think people of all ages now, especially people who are attracted to the Enneagram, are noticing and letting go of resistance.
Yeah, but also I think they are uh, a bit more like truth tellers in different ways.
Yeah.
But so I want to start by summarizing what I think we'll talk about, and then we'll go into details. The thing is, we have lost spiritual realism. It's like we have started idealizing what a spiritual path is, and also sometimes psychological realism. And we started making it simpler than it actually is. And that comes from the big trend over the last decades of easy and somewhat shallow self-help books and authors. They don't want to tell people about how hard this whole thing is, and they tell people only some benefits that sometimes happen when we do inner work. So I don't like that because it creates illusion and delusion.
Right. And I think some people are attracted to spirituality in the first place, again, not with an insincere intention, but just wanting relief, wanting maybe freedom from stress, or an ability or capacity to not feel some of maybe the particular pressures they felt in the past. And so I think sometimes it's just natural to think of spiritual experience as bliss, or as a relief from some sort of stressful pressure that you feel in everyday life. And I think, although that is part of the spiritual path, that's often not what you encounter first, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Or mostly.
Yeah, and some important spiritual traditions already held the belief that for beginners we cannot tell them all that they are going to encounter on the path, because they won't stay. Like in shamanism, Don Juan was Castañeda's master, and he told very explicitly to Castañeda, don't tell your students what they are going to face when they start doing inner work. So in short,
and Dante too. I remember Dante has some asides to the reader in the Divine Comedy, especially in Purgatory, where he says, like, don't get afraid of how hard this is, like, keep going. Because as he unfolds what the spiritual journey is and talks more about what's required, and what people who are purging the passions of the Enneagram and in the Divine Comedy, and aspiring to higher virtues, it's hard work. And he will say very explicitly, like, don't get discouraged.
yeah.
And so I think, on the one hand, we need to warn people, like, it's not all rainbows and butterflies and flowers. But on the other hand, there are rewards. It's just the rewards may not be what you think they are, and it may not be all about well-being and bliss and freedom from stress. It may be meeting challenges that allow you to get to higher states of consciousness that are, at some points, very feeling, involve feelings of relief and liberation, but also there are always additional challenges that come up along the path.
Yeah, and rewards many times take longer to arrive
Right.
than people would want to.
Right. And of course, it depends on your type, right? And we'll talk a little bit about that. Like for some types who probably tend to put more pressure on themselves, they may experience more freedom and relaxation earlier, but other types who maybe want too much freedom and positive feelings may need to indulge or tolerate more difficult feelings for a longer period of time.
Yeah, I agree. Although I think the point here today is not even per type, but for all of us,
Right.
it's harder than it looks like in the
Right.
beginning.
Right.
But don't give up. How did
Yeah.
Dante say? Don't give up.
Don't
It's
get
okay. Yeah.
discouraged. Yeah.
But here's the thing.
It
If
won't last. It's only temporary, is what he says. The really, really hard parts are only temporary.
Yeah. So this first myth that we're talking about is that we'll see light and angels and all will be better very soon. This is a myth because actually when we do serious inner work, we get more and more in touch with difficult content that was already there, but we didn't see. So this is important to know. And did you want to say anything
Well, I
about
would
it?
say a lot of the Enneagram work is about making unconscious habits more conscious, or unconscious material or traumas more conscious.
Yeah.
And it's just natural that when we make what's been relegated to the unconscious more conscious, that there may be a painful experience of getting more in touch with that, because often the whole reason we've relegated certain aspects of our experience to the unconscious is because it's painful or
Yeah.
hard to deal with, or it was so traumatic at a point in our lives, often in childhood, that our psyches couldn't handle it. So we need to understand that as we bring unconscious material into consciousness, that may require pain, it may require facing things that are hard to face, and that's just the nature of the process.
Right. And shadows are in the forefront of all this,
Exactly.
and they are especially hard. But here's another myth. Sometimes people think that instead of getting better, they're getting worse. And it's not like that. It's
Right.
just that we are bringing in content that was already there, but was somewhat narcotized, anesthetized, and we're not getting worse. We're just seeing that content that was there already. And I'm saying this because some people say, I think I'm even changing type. Maybe I'm not anymore the type I think I was, or maybe I was wrong in the past
Right.
because I'm so different. And that's actually good news. And you're not changing type. You're actually getting to higher levels of awareness of your type.
Right.
But those higher levels of awareness sometimes or many times don't look like being nice or good for people outside, for people who know you.
Right.
And many people in the outside start telling you that what's happening with you, what's wrong with you, you need to stop doing this thing. What is the Enneagram, by the way? Right. And then there is another myth, which is we we are not just going to have better relationships like people say. Sometimes the relationships with uh, old people in our lives will get worse. And that's a myth that we really need to talk about, especially with our listeners who are going through transformation.
Right.
And who suffer and sometimes who judge themselves because they are not getting along as well with people in their lives from their childhood or from their past.
Right.
And it gets more difficult, and that's what needs to be expected. And this is why Gurdjieff used to say, you need to regroup. You need to spend time with new people who are also on the path. And you need to understand, and this is yet another myth. People don't talk much about it, that old people in your life will not only not understand and judge, what's happening with you, but they will indirectly, um, um,
Try to put you back the way you were.
yes, and I was going to say to channel energies against your path.
Right. But yeah, it's like
It's unconscious. Yeah.
they're used to you the way you are. And so when
Mhm.
you start changing, that's upsetting, that's threatening because something's changing and I don't know what's going on. And
Mm.
so for some people, when they really actually start making progress on their path, in addition to it being painful, they can get negative feedback from the people around them. And that's, of course, troubling and hard. And it makes it even harder to kind of withstand um, the pressures of the journey. But I have to give a positive example as well of this. Um, I've worked with a lot of threes in the last year or two. And one of the interesting things about the type three journey is that when threes are really doing the work, they often go through a very difficult period of really needing to completely let go of their personality. And part of what happens for threes is because threes are so good at creating a persona that brings them rewards in their society or culture or family or daily life, whether it's financial rewards or being accepted or being attractive or being seen as successful. Sometimes threes are in a way the prototype for all of us, just like they're the prototype for the fact that we all have a persona or personality and we identify that and we think that's all of who we are. Threes, when they're on a growth journey, may be the prototype for all of us when they're really doing sincere inner work. They experience a kind of deconstruction, a kind of like, I don't know who I am anymore, or I don't want to work anymore, or I don't want to do this thing that I've done every day for many, many years. It's made me really successful in the eyes of the people around me. And I've had a lot of experience working with threes where they say, like, I don't know what's happening. All I'm doing is crying, or I feel lost and alone,
I
and
don't want to do as
I
much.
don't want to do anything. And that's terrifying because I have this job or this identity, and it's like all of my identity is going away, and all I want to do is nothing. And when that happens, I try to really communicate with these people a very positive message of, like, great, like, that's amazing. That's exactly what the goal is for you, the real goal. And to really support these people in understanding that although it feels negative, it's actually extremely positive. And I think that for all types, not just threes, what happens when you're really doing the work is your personality starts being deconstructed, crumbling,
Yeah.
not working. You start having the sense of, I don't really want to do this anymore, what the thing I've been doing all this time. And somebody needs to be in your life and will be that somebody, uh, to say that's good, that's a good thing, that's
Right.
positive, that's growth, that's you making progress on the journey. When you feel like, if you're a one, you feel like you feel guilty because everything you're doing is bad, or you're not working hard anymore, or you just want to be lazy and relax.
Yeah.
There's a lot of types that may have that experience, but what we really want to say is that the growth process is not always what you think it is, and it's not always a good feeling. That often it's a hard feeling.
Yeah, and I just want to say that while it becomes more visible for threes, this is a good description for everybody's
Yeah,
process.
exactly.
Now, another myth that I believe we're talking about behind this is that people think that if they do inner work, they will necessarily be more energized and be in touch with more life force. Well, that really happens eventually, really happens, but you need to go through periods of lack of energy. And that's a myth that needs to be, confronted, that you're going to get better and better as you go a little bit each time. And actually, we might do another podcast theme in the future talking about the dark nights, dark night of the senses, and then later on the dark night of the soul. I won't talk much about these, but they are periods where we don't have energy. And it's a big important passage in our deconstruction process, deconstruction of personality. But yet another myth behind this is it's growth, so it's like stairs, one step after another step, like a linear or Cartesian vision of inner growth. And that's not how growth happens. It's more like a pendulum movement. We go up and we go down, and then up and down. And then eventually we get to a middle that's a bit higher than the one before. But it's important to know that up to a certain point where most people aren't yet, we experience that in impermanence and a very big shift up and down at times. Like, for instance, when you go to a retreat, can be an Enneagram retreat. We see that a lot with our students, but it can be also with a meditation retreat or some other kind of inner work or journeys that happen sometimes like with psychedelics. People go up and up and up and have an awareness expansion that's sometimes radical, and then they bounce back. And that's how inner work is. On one hand, we need to be concerned with expansions that are too big because of what happens next. But on the other hand, everything in inner work obeys this pendulum movement. And yet, another myth connected to this, it is when people think that, oh, now I understand about my type, and let me try to do it a bit different. I won't go radically to the other side. I will go to the middle. And that is not how it works.
Can you give an example of that so people understand?
Like 8s are like impulsive, aggressive, and then they think, oh, I need to be less so. I'll need to balance my behavior. And I need not to get to the other opposite side because I want to keep my assertiveness. I want to keep being authentic. And then they try to go to the middle point. It's just an example. And what I'm saying here is that is not how growth works. Why? Because of the law 3 on the Enneagram. When someone is on a certain point, first we need to create the opposite point of that. We need to create the paradox. And only after this, we need to get to the middle point, the reconciling point. So it's not a good idea. And I must say that many Enneagram authors don't get this and suggest something different to their students. It's not a good idea what they suggest, that, keep a little bit your strengths and just work on your weaknesses and try to do it a little less. That approach simply disobeys what law of 3 says. It's to be expected that when you start growing, you go to the very opposite side. You need to be radically opposite.
So you're saying you need to go to the. It's not just that sometimes it happens. It's that you do or you must.
Well, what I'm saying
create
is
the opposite pole.
I guess what I'm saying is, if it's true inner work, that's what's going to happen.
That's what usually happens.
And you need to know that that's the path, and you will be okay. And you need to leave that opposite experience. And I'm talking about the radical opposite. And then after some time, you come back to the middle. Like another example that I see all the time is 9s who, when they are doing good work, they get all of a sudden to this stage in which all they can say is no and disagree with people. Much differently from who they used to be before, never saying no, never going against. And that's essential.
Mm.
so that later on they get to the middle point, the reconciling
Mhm.
force, in which they will be able to ponder and be, a bit more on both sides.
Right. So the law of three being sort of thesis, antithesis, synthesis.
There is no thin synthesis before the
Right. You need to
antithesis.
almost create the other pole
Mm.
along a polarity so
Yeah,
that the reconciling force is a meaningful synthesis of
yeah,
that polarity.
yeah. That's Enneagram theory. I mean, the process Enneagram theory. That's what law of three
Right.
means for many.
Right. In fact, I really appreciate the way that you've helped me see that that gets applied to the arrow work also,
Mm,
right? So we often talk about how you need to go to the arrow against first. So for me as a 2, I need to integrate the high side of 4 as a growth process. But then I need to integrate 8, and 8 is almost the reconciling force between 2 and 4. So that arrow with the arrow that goes forward in our spiritual growth journey is not only another movement that balances our main point, but it's a kind of synthesis or reconciling force for those
yeah,
first 2 arrows, or the main point and the first arrow.
right.
So, what other myths are there about the growth journey? Although I want to summarize that what you said just to make it clear that one myth is the idea that we sort of make step by step progress in a linear way along a journey of
Yeah,
development, but
yeah,
that it's really more of a pendulum movement, that it's just natural that we're going to make progress and then we'll slide back and then we make progress and maybe we get under stress or we experience stressful conditions and we go back to earlier stage of development, that that's just natural. And
yeah,
I really want to emphasize here that this is a reason for people to have a lot of compassion for themselves when they're really doing inner work, for them to cut themselves some slack, to be easier with themselves, because it's only natural that we are going to kind of take one step back, 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, 4 steps forward, that this is
mm,
just the part of the process. And if you've had a real expansion of awareness, if you've really experienced some progress on your journey, that's fantastic. But don't get down on yourself if you also slide back and maybe you get around your parent or a friend that pushes your buttons. It's okay
yeah.
if you find yourself regressing back to an earlier
It's
stage
also
of development.
expected.
It's just normal. But the main thing is that you stay in the game, is that you continue to self observe, that you notice what's happening and you learn from it while not judging yourself and not getting self-critical. Because if you get self-critical, it just reinforces going back down to a lower level awareness and kind of staying there, because now you're piling on and you're feeling bad about yourself, and that's not something that's going to help you move forward. So we want to kind of say, like, expect that there will be this pendulum movement, that you will move up and back. And we talk about this in some of our earlier podcasts on our levels of awareness model, that it is a non-linear movement. But we want to really emphasize this here, because I think when people are really doing the sincere Enneagram work and they find that they slide backwards, it's discouraging. And so it's just, we want to say that that's just part of the path.
Mm.
That's par for the course. So expect that that will happen, observe it, and see any backsliding as a learning opportunity.
Yeah, I think we need to practice complex kinds of thoughts to be able to understand a little more what the growth process is. We can't be like binary, like it's this or that.
Right.
It's really about building and embracing paradoxes,
Mm-hmm.
and even it's even a good idea not to try to understand everything that's happening, because behind that there is something called the mystery.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to talk about another myth, and in the format of mostly a question to you, because I think you explained that super well. There is a myth that says, oh, one of the first steps is to forgive your parents above all. And that's a myth, isn't it?
Yes, yes. As a psychotherapist, I would always feel a little frustrated when I would I would be with a new client who immediately said, "Oh, but it wasn't my parents' fault," or "I've forgiven my mother," or "I understand that they went through something hard." And I think that often, very often, we forgive too quickly. And it's not that forgiveness isn't a good thing. It actually is a good thing. Um, a lot of the goal is getting to a place where you let go of negative emotions and you forgive. But I think sometimes people go there too quickly. And it's a kind of bypass. It's a kind of spiritual bypass where, oh, I'm just going to rise to this higher level and forgive people who have uh, hurt me, etc., without really feeling the hurt or the anger or the sadness or the grief or whatever it is that you need to feel to register and understand and fully process what happened to you. So, one of the things that we really emphasize is that you need to work on your traumas. You need to work on your issues with your parents. You need to work on your issues with your family system and your siblings, and even, friends or partners who have really hurt you, because again, those are learning opportunities. And if you see it that way and you engage with it as, what can I learn about myself? How can my Enneagram type inform the way I defend it against some feelings related to this? How can I really go there and really figure out what I need to learn from this and what I need to do to fully process it, which often means feeling the full force of the emotions connected to any experience, any traumatic experience, any experience where you've really had a difficult time in a relationship. You need to feel those feelings before you get to forgiveness.
Yeah.
And if you don't, it's just a kind of a workaround. It's just um, you're fooling yourself into thinking that you've really worked through when you haven't. And the problems associated with that experience will stick with you and kind of keep pulling you down. So yes, forgiveness is the goal ultimately, but recognize that the path to forgiveness leads through necessarily feeling all your feelings, understanding what happens, sometimes expressing those feelings, sometimes, whatever that means for you. It doesn't necessarily have to be with the person. It can be writing
It's
about
better
it.
if not, many
Often
times.
it's better if you don't, because the person may not give you what you think you need to heal, but often just describing it to a psychotherapist, writing about it in a journal, feeling, having some sort of cathartic experience emotionally can be what you really need to move beyond and then get to the place where you're ready to forgive and let it go.
Right. And underneath that, perhaps there is still also another myth. And that is, a few emotions are not noble. And, if I'm connecting to those emotions, it's because I'm not getting better. And notably, anger is something demonized by people.
Right.
And the myth here is, if I'm getting angry, more angry than before, then I'm getting worse.
Right.
And actually, I like to explain at times that the opposite of love is not anger.
Yeah.
The opposite of love is indifference. And anger is in between. So if we are indifferent, for instance, with a parent, we don't really like to be around them. Going towards love makes you go through anger. And being angrier with your parents is a sign of evolution. So that's another myth that I think we need to how do you say it?
Yeah,
Bust.
myth busting.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember one time on a webinar or something, I talked about how anger was actually a positive experience for many people and many types, like certainly nines, ones. needing to get more okay with anger. And there was a lot of activity in the chat saying, can you say what a positive experience of anger looks like? Because again, a lot of people think anger is only bad. And of course, often this comes from, you know, traumatic experience of like growing up in a family where there was fighting and conflict and violence. And so if you have the sense that anger is bad, it's likely that there's a reason for that. And that's important to understand. And anger on its own, aside from the context of whatever ways we've experienced in our lives, is a neutral emotion. It depends on how it's expressed. It can be expressed constructively or destructively, right? So anger can be good. It can be a way that we say what's important to us. It's a way that we get motivated to create boundaries that we need. It can be a way of putting a stake in the ground or engaging in healthy conflict. And so we need to recognize that anger needs to be felt and processed and then let go as part of a healthy emotional process. And again, I think for some of the Enneagram types, there's a or just people who've had a history of trauma related to angry people in their lives. There can be a sense of like anger is always bad. And if you feel angry, then you're not making progress on your journey. And that's just not the case. For some types, we really need to get in touch with healthy anger and express it. And again, often that's writing it in a journal or talking with a therapist or with a good friend that you trust. It's not necessarily like expressing the anger to your mother that you never did, because maybe your mother can't hear it or she's not going to change, and it's only going to make it harder for you. But it's important to ask the question, what do you need around getting in touch with anger as part of your process?
Right. There are some people who say something that I don't particularly like, and that is, if you want to know if the path is good, you need to see if the person is getting better. And why is it that I don't like it? Because people idealize what getting better means.
Right.
And many times it doesn't look like getting better, but it is getting better. So I'll give type examples. It's easy to know that an 8 is getting better because the 8 is getting more soft and harmless, being more in touch with the heart. It's also easy to see that a 1 is getting better because the 1 is more flexible, happier, and
More funny.
funny. And then a 5 perhaps also, because the 5 is getting more sociable, funny, and so on. But it's not as easy to see that a 7 is getting better when they are getting sadder,
Right.
when they are getting sometimes even too serious,
Or more in touch with their pain, more depressed.
right?
Maybe that's healthy.
Or some 6s, when they grow, especially self-pressed 6s, they get less warm. Or choose even more. Choose get less nice.
Yes.
And the 3, as you said, the 3 won't do as much.
Right.
And a 9 won't be as receptive to you. Will say more no, and
Right.
will be more a contrarian. And a 4, perhaps people see more easily that a 4 is getting better because of less drama, less emotionality. But at times, also 4s look like they are not as passionate as before.
Right.
So,
more disconnected.
Yeah. Bottom line, if we come from a more social perspective of what's good and what isn't, we will not understand when some people are getting better because they are getting more honest with their own feelings and getting less attached to being in a certain way in life and society.
Right. Right. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. It's like we need to watch out for a more generalized sense of what we tend to think of what it means to get better when you're doing personal growth work. Like you get nicer, you get more relaxed, you get more easygoing. It depends on the type. you know, and we really have to go type by type and person by person to see like what's good for you, you know. Maybe for a 7, getting a little more uptight and a little more particular about the details is a good thing, because maybe they're using their arrow to 1 in a positive way. Maybe that means they're getting more focused and they're getting more focused on execution or implementation, or making sure all the details are completed in a positive way.
Right. Yeah. And I want to say that inner work is also made of sacrifices, made of sacrifices mainly related to some type related or not type related addictions that we all have, attachment to things. And we need to let these go if we want to grow. And the more we sacrifice consciously, the more we will get rewards. And people don't get that. Um, so for me as a 5, for instance, sacrifice a little bit my attachment to knowledge. It's super important.
Right.
And then as we sacrifice, and we need to be wise in terms of sacrificing, because a 1 might very easily sacrifice leisure or pleasure.
Right.
I'm not talking about this.
Yeah.
I'm talking about sacrificing what our ego wants.
Right.
So for once, it's sacrificing duty and going for leisure. For
Right.
instance,
And doing the right thing.
doing the right thing. So I sacrifice that. So there must be conscious suffering when we sacrifice our ego. And eventually we get to the most difficult form of sacrifice, which is sacrificing our main suffering, which is the one really behind our identity and our type.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Let me see.
Any last myths we haven't busted yet, before we go to our top 5? And I leave it to you to be thoughtful about this, because one of us may or may not have had 2 caipirinhas before this conversation here in Brazil.
Yeah, being in Brazil, it's hard not to have those, although I didn't.
I was going to let people decide.
Well, I had 1.
Who had 2.
2, yes.
And now you gave it away.
Oh, yeah, sorry for that. Yeah. I just thought that people would assume it was me, for sure.
That's true. They might have.
Yeah.
Since you're the Brazilian.
Yeah. Anyway, no, I think we covered important stuff, and we had no intention to complete all we wanted to say about this.
There's, of course, always more to say about this topic of inner work.
Yeah. Actually, I have one more thing to say.
Okay.
Just one. We need to be very careful with thinking that we are in control of our growth process, and thinking that I'm doing that because I decided. It's like, in practice, someone up there has decided for you that you're going to deconstruct yourself, and you can do your best to catch up with what's happening in your life and to help and to make efforts, but you're not in control. So the myth is that a human being can be the one doing all the inner
This is
growth.
a little more of a spiritual.
It is, indeed. I think we come from an excessively anthropocentric view of inner work. And it's important to know that inner work happens to us also. Not inner work, but deconstruction that requires inner work.
Well, and I think it also, I mean, for those who are spiritually inclined, prayer often helps. And thinking positively in terms of feeling into what you want to manifest can help. So I think that there is a spiritual element to growth that, if we open up more to it and more to it, it activates things that we maybe don't understand cognitively, because it's beyond us as humans.
Right.
And for those of us who aren't spiritually inclined, maybe that isn't something that makes sense. But I think for us, that's definitely a part of the picture.
Yeah, and then there is the myth that the path is psychological only or spiritual only.
Right.
It needs to be both,
Right. In our
right?
view.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we can go to our top five.
Okay, so it's time for our top five.
And what is our top five today?
Our top five is the top 5 types most likely to gossip.
Okay.
And it's
Good.
funny because I know you don't like people who gossip. I don't mind people who gossip. Although, of course, mean-spirited gossiping is always not good. But I don't think of gossip as only mean-spirited. So I
Yeah.
just want to say that, put that out there.
Yeah, it's not even, there is not even a value judgment here
Yeah.
of being good or bad. I think that in my case, not liking gossip also has a little bit of ego content. Since I
point.
was a very small kid, I couldn't bear being together with people who gossip, and I would go to my
Interesting.
room.
Interesting. So there may
And
be something very deeply rooted
yeah,
there.
there's fear
About
of
you.
people talking about me as a five.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Although generally, I think that gossip is something not very clean.
Often,
Yeah.
yes. Although I kind of think I
Yeah.
like it when people talk about me when I'm not there. It makes me
Oh,
feel a little more
good
important.
to know. Okay.
Yeah, so feel free.
Even if they say bad things.
Yeah, in some ways, even then, because at least they're focusing on me.
So, what is your number five? The one, the top, the fifth that gossips the most.
So my number 5 is 3.
Why?
Because I think 3s aren't the biggest gossips, but I also think that 3s kind of are looking at what's happening. They can be competitive, and sometimes being competitive makes you interested in what other people are doing and how they're doing. And so I think while on the one hand, 3s tend to kind of have laser like focus on getting to their goal in the way that they choose, I also think that there's a tendency to be competitive and to be tuned into what others think, and how people evaluate people may lead them to be interested in what's going on with other people.
I hear you. For me, my fifth is type 8. I think that it's related to vengeance because sometimes, like when threes gossip, it sounded like in your explanation that they're being strategic in making a gossip,
Maybe.
on gossiping. And I think it's similar to eights. Like when they're not happy with someone, they might convey some information to someone else. And I think that eights can do that, but it's definitely not among the three that do it the most, I think.
Well, that's why 8 is in my number 4 position.
Is it similar?
Similar, exactly,
reasoning?
similar reasoning, like vengeance, kind of watching to see what other people are doing and who's doing what, and who you might need to get vengeance on, or who you might need to, be aware of in terms of your own advancement forward or things like that. Yeah, so similar reasons.
Yeah.
So what's your number 4?
It's type 9. And
I'm really impressed, by the way, how you're not looking at any notes or anything. You have
I
this
am.
all
You
in your
don't see
mind.
my cell phone
Oh,
there.
you're on your cell phone. I see.
So it's type 9 for a similar reason of what I said about type 8. It has to do with, being mad at someone and using passive aggression to deal with that. And a particular form of passive aggression, which is saying something to someone else, pretending that there is no bad intention behind it. I see nines sometimes doing that unconsciously or not.
Interesting.
But again, it's my 4th, so I don't think that nines are among the ones that really gossip the most.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't have 9s in my top 5. Interesting. Yeah. My number 3 is 7.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because I think 7s, sometimes 7s aren't that interested in what other people are doing. Sometimes they are. I think when they are, it's a little bit of like, who's doing what, and are they doing something that's more interesting or more fun than what I'm doing? And I think also some 7s have a little bit of a lack of empathy for others. So they're not so concerned about like is this person going to be heard if I'm thinking about them or talking about them? It's more an intellectual thing of, am I interested in what that person's doing? Am I missing out on something that they're doing that's more interesting or fun than I'm doing? So I think sometimes sevens can gossip from that
Right.
point of view.
Yeah, I don't have sevens in my list, and I guess that I see them doing a bit more like inadvertently they say something. It's not, I didn't classify that as gossip. It's more like being indiscreet. But I may be wrong. I hear you. But my number 3 is type 6. I think that sixes engage in gossiping quite often, and even more so self-pressed sixes. But it's my experience with many sixes that they don't mind gossiping. And I think it has to do with being indirect sometimes in confronting stuff. And, and that thing of creating alliances, which is big for sixes. But it seems you don't have sixes in your list either.
I don't. My number 2 is 4.
Oh.
Because again, I think it's the comparing mind that gets interested in what other people are doing or what experiences other people are having, or is someone having an experience more richer or better than my experiences, or things like that. And again, it's like I think when 4s are interested in what other people are doing, I don't see it as necessarily mean spirited. I mean, I think it can be at times, but I think it can be there can be a sort of a kind of resentment or anger or competition underneath it. But I often think it's about interest in what others are doing as a way of identifying and elaborating that comparison point. Like, the more I think about and talk about what that other person's doing, the more I can think about, like, am I doing that same thing? Or maybe I should be doing that same thing, or I'm glad I'm not doing that same thing. And so I think it's a little bit like that, being interested in people and what's going on with them, in part because of the comparing mind, but in part because of that, connection, understanding, being interested in people.
Right. So 4 is also my second, and I see the same reasons you're talking about. I just want to emphasize that I believe gossiping is one of the assets of that particular passion of 4s, which is envy. And envy is not better or worse than any other passion. I want to make sure everybody understands that. But I think it's a tool.
When you say it's an asset, is it a positive thing?
No.
Oh, okay. Because you said it was an
No,
asset.
the passion
which
is not a positive thing.
But normally the word asset connotes something positive.
I remember in Sufism, they talk about personality assets, like fame, desire,
sort of like personality
money,
strengths, not necessarily a good thing.
Like what personality has as something that personality owns that keeps personality in place.
I see.
So, but no matter what the name is, I think for 4s, gossiping is connected to envy as a passion.
Yeah.
And I agree with the explanations you provided. Yeah. So I guess we have the same number 1.
Well, we may have the same number 1.
And it is 2.
Is it 2?
Is it? So I want to hear from you. What is that makes you choose gossip more?
So I don't think of gossip as a bad thing.
Oh, okay.
Although it can be, of course, if it's mean-spirited. Like if you're doing it with a conscious or unconscious intention of tearing someone down, or I don't know, criticizing them. And I think for me as a 2, so I've always related to this humorous phrase. I can't remember where it comes from. I think it comes from a movie or something, but it says, like, if you remember, the phrase is, if you don't have something nice to say about someone, come sit by me. Right? And I think it's a play on the phrase, like, if you don't have something good to say about something, don't say anything at all. Like, I think that's the original, don't say anything if you don't have something nice to say. And for some reason I associate it with Bette Midler, and maybe it's a character of hers in a movie. But I think there's something fun about talking about people as a two. And again, sometimes it can be mean spirited, like it comes out of competition or wanting to be better than or wanting to know what's going on so I can plan what I want to do accordingly. But sometimes it's just I'm so interested in people that I'm interested in knowing what's going on with everybody. Like and again, I think that's a two. It's a challenge or a problem for twos in that it's like I want to know what's going on behind the scenes with everyone. I want to know what's going on behind in everyone's relationship and what trouble are they having or what's going well, or there's something about knowing the juicy details of everybody's experience, especially if I care about them or I'm interested in them. But sometimes too, if I feel competitive with them, or if what they're doing is going to inform what I want to do. There's something about being really people oriented, being interested in what's going on behind the scenes with people that I think it sort of, it's juicy, it's fun to talk about people. But as I've been on my own growth path and been noticing this about myself, I've tried to be more positive in like what you might consider gossip, like, and not be negative, not be critical of people, not like want to talk about something that's going wrong for someone and take joy or pleasure in that. It's more like, um, it, I try to check myself in terms of not saying things about that I shouldn't say and not talking about things that are motivated from a sense of, again, taking any kind of pleasure in someone's misfortune. Mostly for me, there's something about twos that are just we're very interested in people and what's going on underneath the surface, behind the curtain.
Yeah, I hear you about this somewhat less harmful form of gossip, but I think I associate type 2 and gossiping a bit more with the fixation of flattery or adulation, in which you need to both make compliments and then know everything about people for an intention, consciously or not, of manipulating. And I think, I see that in type 2 students and clients a lot, but also I consider I have been a victim of a bad tendency of a type 2 person in my life who gossiped.
Was it me?
No, it wasn't
Okay,
you,
thank you.
at all. Yeah,
Good.
and I just
Try not
know
to.
I just know many people who feel hurt by gossips made by type 2 people when they are more visible, when something comes up. And yeah, and I think it's more natural for a type that focus so much on people, relationships, but also being well with people in ways that it's not only being well but needing to be special.
I also think it's when you want to have a surface positive relationship, but as it too sometimes have a hard time telling the whole truth to the person directly. So I think anytime there are things that you're holding back, that you're thinking about or feeling about someone, sometimes I can say as a two, I've been motivated to triangulate or to tell somebody else. Like maybe I'm having a feeling about you, but I don't really feel comfortable or I don't want to have conflict with you. So I don't tell you, but then I go tell someone else, which can be seen as gossiping. So I think two sometimes have that experience where they have feelings or thoughts about someone that they don't feel comfortable being direct about or being honest about directly toward the person. And there's a way of venting the feelings or processing it with somebody else that in some circumstances wouldn't be classified as gossip. It might be classified as like venting and processing so that they can go tell the person. But in some cases it's just like an offloading of feelings and thoughts that they don't really process in a sort of more constructive way to be able to have a more positive relationship with the person that they are having feelings about that they may feel like they can't express directly.
Interesting explanations, and thank you for this top 5
and
this podcast.
Okay, so that does it for us today. Thank you again for being with us and listening and watching to our Enneagram 2.0 podcast. Please join us again next time for this podcast where we talk about all things Enneagram.
Thank you.
Thank you.